Sometimes when I'm thinking about us, before we got lost and we parted, back to back we would carry on and we'd do anything for what we started. But this time we could break. I'm running dry, everything's the same. We'll try tonight, this time we're not safe and sound. Not safe and sound. Back we would carry on and we'd do anything for what we started. But this time we could break. I'm running dry, everything's the same. We'll try tonight, this time we're not safe and sound. Not safe and sound. What if I'm no good for you? What if you're no good for me? Yeah.
What is up, you guys? It's Tuesday night, and it's time for the news. Welcome to the news. How you doing, Blunty?
Good. How's it going, Joshua?
Oh, it's good, man. I'm always glad to be here. This is becoming the highlight of my week, actually.
Awesome, man.
So it's the live streams are fun. Live streams are fun, but you know, I'll sit here and chat with you about the latest. I said earlier this week, I was like, the news, the only things that are if it's not on our show, then it doesn't matter. I might have been exaggerating a little.
I think we cover most of the good stuff, that's for sure.
If you guys have any suggestions for stuff that we should cover, if you see, like I don't know about you, but just throughout the week when I see something and I go, oh, neat, and then boom, I just forward it and put it on the show notes. So if you guys see anything and you're like, oh, that's interesting, that should be on the news, send it to news@fpvknowitall.com and we'll get it, maybe we'll get it added. So what have we got on the news this week, Blunty?
So this week, we're going to talk about HDMI out of the DJI goggles without a smart controller.
Without a smart controller? You mean I don't have to spend $700 on a smart controller just to put a DJI signal on my TV?
Absolutely. We've got a DJI V2 goggle image. We could talk about that. Yeah,
wow.
We'll see.
An image of the DJI goggle V2?
DJI talked on the forums, talking about some future updates. So got some information there.
Yeah.
Some of you guys know leaker Aceta LV. Aceta LV has some leaks for us on DJI on the FPV system.
This is a known leaker, right?
Absolutely. Aceta's been pretty accurate. I would say 80 to 90% accuracy probably on the leaks that I've been following for the last 10, 11 months. So.
Not something many people would want to be known as. Oh, that guy, he's a known leaker.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a 16x16 AIO being released by JHEMCU.
Okay. That's very interesting. I'm already famously skeptical of 20 millimeter hardware, so taking it down to 16 I should only love it more.
We've got a new Caddx camera coming soon for the DJI. It looks like maybe a sequel to the Nebula.
Maybe they'll get it right this time.
We can only hope. That's for sure. We've got the FrSky XM Plus might be shipping with new firmware, so we might have some binding issues. We'll talk about that.
Binding issues with FrSky. Who could have seen that coming?
So surprising.
I should say, I don't hate people. Sometimes people ask me for help, and they're like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I have an R9. I know. Don't be like that. I will help. I'm only annoyed at FrSky. I'm not annoyed at you for owning FrSky. Bring it.
It's not your fault. You just happen to own the hardware.
Maybe you even like it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
R9's not bad for most people. I just think there's a lot of situations in which it becomes an issue. So
yeah.
Anyway. We've also got a guy was charged for hitting a helicopter in LA
with a drone. This one is different from many of the others because the drone was actually recovered. So legit, we finally, after all these years, have a solid case where a drone did hit an aircraft. Yay? Anyway.
I guess we'll find out. We're doing our community spotlight, so we've got a cool little thing in the community spotlight this week from one of our community members.
Mm-hmm. A way that you can get some free stuff, sort of.
Yeah. And then we've got Trappy responding to some comments that you made on your Facebook.
Who would have thunk it? Yeah, I always just spout off my mouth with opinions. And then Trappy is like, well, actually, and then I'm like, oh. So I made some conjectures about why Tracer does not support LoRa in the 2.4 gigahertz band when the hardware that it is believed to have could support it. And Trappy's answer surprised me. So,
yeah.
All right. We are also watching the chat. If you guys want to drop a super chat, just hit that $sign down below the chat, leave a super chat. And we'll read out your question, although this is not a Q&A live stream per se. Still read your super chat. You got to read super chats if you're doing YouTube, right? That's just, you have to. So this is one of the things I was most terrified of in the Terrence Howard live stream.
I bet.
Like I was like, look, we're going to talk about this one thing. If there are questions like, weren't you in Iron Man 2? I'm like, that's a pretty rude question. I'm not going to ask my guest a rude question. But then if somebody pays a $50 super chat, I kind of have to. So I don't know. But thankfully that didn't come up. Anyway, license to drive. You got to wait for it. Trappy's answer will be later in the stream. What are we going to do first, Blunty?
So let's talk about A Day at the Range. Active member in your community.
Yes, he is.
And A Day at the Range has got a solution to get HDMI out of the DJI FPV goggles.
All right.
And you don't have to flash a custom firmware onto the goggle, which was the previous caveat. If anybody knows, A Day at the Range is the guy who was claiming previously to have a custom firmware solution for the DJI FPV goggles and thus has a SD card out solution for streaming HDMI out of the goggles. But now he has a different solution. Because the first one he sold to DJI.
Right. And he messed. First of all, everybody who said it's BS, he's lying. I'm showing this video and you can see for yourself, this is what he claims to be a validation. You can never prove that someone's not faking it, but it sure looks legit to me. Like, oh, maybe he's got a smart controller under the table and he's lying. I don't know, but I'm just showing you the video. But then he said DJI came and bought it off of him. And then he came to me and he said, hey, I made another one. And I'm like, didn't DJI pay you not to do that? And he said, well, they only bought the first one. I checked with my lawyer and it's like, well, I made another one. I'm like, this guy is the ultimate mad lad.
Yeah. And it seems like this did take some decent work. He's got like a little hardware box in between. And it looks like he's actually selling that currently.
Yeah.
Over on his Patreon. So if he wants a solution for this, he has a Patreon page where you can sign up and get that from him, and he will ship you the hardware, from what I understand, and maintain it with you. So. Now,
we're going to put a link to that Patreon in the show notes after the show is over. I'm going to show it here on screen as soon as I figure out my frickin'... There we go. There we go. So I want to be clear that I assume you, Blunty, are not endorsing this. I have not tested this. I don't know anything about it. So if you decide you want to spend $25, that's on you. I mean, I would love to test it out, but he's currently at 33 patrons and $425 a month. So if you want to jump on and give that a try, I think it's hilarious that after taking a cash payout from DJI to not do this, he was like, yeah, but you didn't say I couldn't do the same thing another way. But I think the ultimate payback will be if DJI puts HDMI out, like there's a lot of speculation about DJI maybe coming out with a V2 goggle. If they just pull the rug right out from under him by putting HDMI out in it. But hey, get paid while you can.
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is like something DJI should have expected. When you're playing with somebody like this, I think like you're playing with a guy who's got custom firmware and custom hacks to get SD card out of the goggles of streaming HDMI. I think he's probably going to find another solution. Like, to me, it's pretty crazy to me that it didn't cover more than one option. But
if I'm DJI, I mean, I would write the contracts to be like, and you won't do it ever again.
Yeah, we own you basically.
If only so you can't come back and just done them for more money.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, because it seems like you would just own his, like, anything you do to our system. No longer. Yeah.
Anybody in the chat, have you joined his Patreon?
Yeah, as you said, we really don't know much about the actual hardware and if it actually works. All we know is the videos and what he's told you.
Yeah.
But I think the timeline to me makes sense, and what he's put out makes sense, and I don't really think this is fake. So,
Mr. Huggy, you are correct, and he acknowledged as much. He said that the first method that they bought off him it was based on like reading data from the SD card and basically somehow processing the DVR in real time, and you had to run custom firmware. This one does not require custom firmware on the goggles. It's just a hardware thing, but he said DJI could easily release a firmware update that breaks it, in which case it just wouldn't work anymore. So,
License to Drive mentions, I'm not clued up on DJI's system, but does that feed on the TV look a bit blocky? And I do agree with that. That's something I was looking at when I looked at this before. I don't think the smart controller output is blocky. I believe the smart controller output is the same output as the goggles see. However, we're seeing on the TV a blocky output, which I would assume would be a spectator view.
Yeah, so maybe he has a second set of goggles in spectator view that he's feeding through his box. I agree, that blockiness looked like spectator mode to me, or audience mode.
Yep. However, this is the first time we've seen anything like this. So I think this is if nothing else, this is an indication to other people like, hey, guys, somebody else can look at this and do the same thing, if they feel the need to. Or like you said, DJI will respond, as many expect, and will release a V2 goggle with HDMI out, and this will be null and void.
It would be so good if they did that.
Would be so nice.
Oh, he says there's a lot of lag. Medrone says, he must be on Patreon. He says he's working on trying to fix the blockiness and commenting about it. There's also major lag. I mean, this guy's just a crazy hacker, though.
Sounds like spectator mode to me.
Maybe. I mean, if it works in spectator mode, it would work in, I don't know. Maybe not.
Right.
It should work in regular mode, too.
Maybe you can't fly with it while it's connected or so. Yeah, I don't know.
Don't know.
Yep.
All right. Well, a day at the range. Keep hacking, dude. Keep it up. What else we got?
So let's move on to a possible DJI V2 goggle image. This has been going around on Facebook. And,
yeah, let me pull this up for the stream.
Yeah, I would go ahead and say I think you guys can all make your own judgments about this picture. But I'm heavily on the side of fake picture here.
Yeah, that looks... Well, as someone said in the comments, DJI would never name anything V2.
Yeah.
They would never say V2. They would name it the FPV Goggle 2 or something. And this looks like a Photoshop, like an emboss or something. So I think this is fake. It's cute, but fake. All right. Well, sorry, let's read the show notes. From a fake image to something a little more substantial, people have noticed that the DJI firmware hasn't been updated in a while. They dropped the 50 megabit per second firmware update, and then they were just like, okay, we got it, we're good. Which, for anybody else would be normal, but DJI has been dropping these updates so fast and furious, it really stands out. So people were speculating, Does this mean that they're dropping support for the goggle, the V1? Does this mean that the V2 is around the corner? And 507RC, he's on YouTube, among other places. He just asked, what an idea. And they came back with a quote: "Rest assured that DJI will continuously create and give out updates for the DJI FPV in the future." So, not dead yet, huh?
Not dead yet. I mean, there's always a chance that some random dude on a forum, a community manager, who doesn't really know anything, and he won't know that it's going to change. But I think at the end of the day, with all the other things that we've seen, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense for them to stop the DJI FPV system. And I think that kind of leads into the next story that we have, actually. As Aceta LV has put out a leak on his Twitter, and he is showing basically the image we showed last week of the DJI controller, but he's saying that his sources are telling him that controller will not only be the 5.8 gigahertz that DJI normally is, but it'll be 915 megahertz. And also that some of the resellers have gotten the DJI FPV drone that's everybody's rumored and have already received it for testing. Yeah.
So according to this leak, it would be a DJI FPV drone with 5.8 and 915. 5.8 control, I guess, but 915 for greater range. I don't know. I could see it. With a controller like this, kind of like a Tango style controller. And I'm so psyched. I guess psyched isn't the word. I'm so intrigued is probably the better word by the DJI FPV drone. Because my first thought is that it's probably going to be stupid. But I kind of would have thought that about, if you look at the DJI goggles RE, and think about how bad they were as an FPV goggle, and then how much better the DJI FPV goggles are. Well, maybe they can make an FPV drone that's half decent. I don't know.
Sure, but maybe the drone will be like the goggles RE, and will be something we don't want the first generation, Yeah,
so, definitely.
So the other thing that I think he talks about there a little bit is just kind of offhandedly is the remote adjustable camera. And the rumor from DJI or about the DJI drone is that it will be adjustable tilt with a control. So you'll actually be able to change the tilt of the drone camera basically from the controller.
Yeah, this is something that people have asked about before. Why do we fly with fixed up tilt in FPV? Why don't we have like a servo that lets us change the up tilt? And one reason is that, like, people even say, why don't we stabilize the camera? But that doesn't work for acro because, you need to be able to go upside down and stuff. But I like to say that knowing the direction of your thrust relative to your camera angle, that's something that you as an experienced pilot pick up. And you learn that when I raise the throttle, I'm going to go this much forward and this much up. And you kind of feel that and dial it in. And if you're changing the up tilt of the camera in the middle of a flight, that's going to change in the middle of the flight. And like, I've imagined a scenario before where maybe you have a camera with 20 degrees of up tilt and 45. And then, like, as you go into a power loop, you flick the 45 so you can see into the power loop. I could kind of see that maybe.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what the practical applications are, because I think I agree. In the middle of a flight, changing camera tilt seems extremely wild, especially for how we fly FPV drones. And even if you think about how a consumer would approach an FPV drone with stabilized flight modes and GPS rescue and stuff, I still can't imagine, maybe you have the camera tilted and the GPS rescue triggers, the drone goes flat in angle mode, and then the camera goes to zero.
Yeah.
Something like that. So, we don't, I guess we got to see what they're going to do, but
I will say, I think I'm willing to give DJI a little bit of credit that they may be at a point where they understand the FPV market enough that they'll be able to come up with something smarter than we realize that we want. And I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago. I would have been like, they just don't get us and they're going to give us something dumb. But I'm not so sure about that now.
My understanding from the Facebook posts that I see and such are that they sponsor a racing league for DJI in China. And so I think they get a lot of feedback from those kind of guys to see like what they need in the system and what people would actually use,
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say real quick, let's see who asked that. Bill Grimes said, wouldn't that be 5.8 video and 915 control link? So it would be 5.8 video, but currently the DJI controller uses 5.8 control link as well.
That's true.
So the theory on this would be that it has the option for 5.8 control link or 915 for that long range, maybe lower frequency update rate or something like that. We really don't know too much about that. But
yeah, it's similar to, what's the radio? It's the one Steel used to have way back when, the super expensive one, Jetty. Doesn't Jetty have a radio with a combination 2.4 and 915 control link?
Well, that's before my time.
No, it's today. I think it's today.
Really?
It's like
I've
a
never
new
heard
radio.
of that. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, nobody in FPV uses it. My thought about that is if you have a robust 915 control link, why would you ever use 2.4?
Sure.
I don't know.
I guess, yeah, update frequency. It's kind of the big, that's a big conversation, I guess, that's going on right now.
Yeah. Dauntless H, 915 video is yes, possible, but no, not practically speaking. The 915 megahertz band is so narrow that you just cannot get much data into it. If you look on the internet, there are 915 megahertz analog wireless cameras out there, but the video quality is pretty bad, and it really wouldn't work for FPV. So, all right, so we're getting closer and closer to the rumors, but still, we still don't have a product, and still nothing about the DJI Goggle V2 that everybody's curious about.
Yeah.
Just other things.
Right.
All right. Well, we got another new product here. JHEMCU has released a new all-in-one, I guess it's a 25 millimeter toothpick style flight controller. Is that right? Is it 25 millimeter, Blunty? Or is it 20 millimeter?
20 by 20 or 16 by 16, but I believe it comes out
16, of course. That's in the frickin' title. Yeah, it's the first 16 by 16 all-in-one board. I'm showing it here on, I'm screwing it up. Here we go. I'm showing it here on screen, Blunty. What do you think about this?
Yeah, they basically squeezed the motor pads in on the edges there. They've basically done everything they can to fit it on this board. It is just an F4, of course.
Crazy.
I don't know that you would expect much more than that.
Crazy.
But honestly, it seems pretty solid. I mean, obviously we have to see it fly and see how it's going to work out and stuff. But for the size, I mean, I don't think the layout is terrible.
Where are the FETs? I'm looking.
Keep
1, 2.
Oh, I see.
Is it on the underside?
Yeah, there's some.
They've kind of squeezed. They've squeezed the FETs out to the edge. It's insane. Yep. My thing with these all-in-one boards has always been that putting this much hardware on a board really makes it harder to be reliable. Now, the toothpick style flight controllers, the 25 millimeter ones, especially the higher end ones like the iFlight H7 Beast or the SP Racing all-in-one, those ones have reached a level where I'm not sure I would use it on like a typical 5-inch, but I feel fine using it on, like, let's say a light 5-inch or a 4-inch and below. But now you go down to 16 millimeter. It's like, what is this for?
Yeah, I mean, it's the ever chasing the weight, Everybody's always chasing the weight. 4.3 gram board, and you get an AIO. You got
4.3 grams.
4.3 grams.
That's crazy. How many UARTs has it got? They're asking in the chat. Can we see?
Just two. Just two
UARTs. Oof.
Yeah.
So if you got GP.
But let's just say we do have SCL SDA pads, which I think is interesting. Also LED, buzzer, and a current sensor, so that at least we're not dropping that, and 13 amp FETs up to 4S.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's insane. These all-in-ones, I've always said, they're not that much lighter than how heavy is a flight controller really? But now you're getting to the point where, it's a pretty big freaking difference.
Yeah. This is lighter than a lot of flight controllers. We're getting in that range.
Yeah. All right. Can it use iNav? Ask SPV Wannabe. iNav requires dedicated SDA-SCL pads, and it seems like this has that. Whether it would be able to have an iNav target, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's up to the manufacturer to develop an iNav target, or them to send hardware to the iNav developers, and the iNav developers will make a target for them, I believe. Is what I understand.
Why do most people run Crossfire with DJI? Asks Sean Carrig. It's just you always want your control link range to be much, much greater than your video range. So then you just, when you're flying with 2.4 gig and analog, you're always thinking, am I going to fail safe my control link? Am I going to lose video? When you fly with Crossfire, you stop asking the question, am I going to fail safe my control link? And you only have to think about video, and it's just one thing off the table. That's basically it.
It's literally, you never worry about it. For anybody that's never flied Crossfire, you just get to forget about it. And it's literally one of the most peace of mind things you can get, because you're constantly worried about fail-safing with the drone, and you're constantly worried about the video going out. So yeah, I mean, it's just so nice not to worry about. And then with DJI, you know, you're pretty confident with the video, because you get a good idea when it's going to cut out. You know where you can fly. It's got good penetration. Yeah, I mean, worst case with DJI, you typically get higher latency. You can fly back out of it. You come back. Yeah, I think Crossfire makes a lot of sense for many pilots, because, again, you would much rather lose video and be able to punch out up than lose control and not have anything to do. So.
Yeah. Yep, I agree 100%. I mean, the DJI control isn't bad. It's got good range. Yeah. But kind of like, I just like to have that as a backup. Also, well, anyway. Yeah. Okay.
We'll move on to the Caddx teaser here.
Yeah, another new product.
Albert Kim posted the first one up of a teaser, and then Caddx posted it as well. All we have right now is pretty much the image of the camera, 720p 120 frames per second. That means it is the low latency mode camera, and from what I'm hearing, it's going to come in between the Nebula and the normal DJI camera as far as pricing, but otherwise that's all that I know.
Well, the big I'm happy to see them releasing a camera with the low latency mode. I usually, if not always, fly low latency. And it annoys me that the Nebula can only do high quality. I like to be able to switch. I'm still annoyed that I don't have the option, but if they're going to release a lightweight camera at a lower cost, at least now I can pick. But the big question for me will, of course, be the image quality. I'm not that impressed with the image quality on the Nebula.
If they release another Nebula style camera that has the same quality as the Nebula, I think it's suicide. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to trust buying a DJI Caddx camera for the near future if that's the case. I think they know better, and I'm going to guess that this camera is going to look good. I really think they know. I mean,
better. They can make a good-looking camera. The Ratel looks amazing.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. Is this is like a Ratel sensor or something? You know, like I don't know exactly how the sensor technology works for the DJI output, but you know they have good sensors, like you said. So hopefully this will be one of them.
Yeah. People have pointed out that the Nebula V2 does have better low light sensitivity than its default DJI camera. That's a use case that is worth acknowledging. If you fly a lot at dusk or in low light, the Nebula might make more sense. It is lighter, obviously, but it's like 5 grams lighter. I don't think that usually matters. Anyway, looking forward to seeing that. I hope Caddx gets it right. We'll see. So have you guys ever tried to bind a FrSky receiver and it won't bind because your firmware version is wrong? Yeah, that's happened to all of us. One of the changes that I have wondered about for a long time might be happening. And Blunty, we've tried to confirm this, but haven't quite been able to confirm whether FrSky has started shipping receivers with firmware 2.x on them instead of 1.9.
Yeah, we actually bought an RSXR. We tested that, and the RSXR did come on 1.x.
Yeah.
However, I have troubleshooted in the last week 2 users on your Discord, and they have both had XM Pluses brand new out of the box, and were not able to bind them, and then flashed them to the 1.x firmware, and were able to bind them. So, I mean, that's pretty telling to have 2 in a row within a week. You know, we'll see if more people report this, but I definitely think it's something to watch out for. And if you hear about it, you know, now you know what to tell people.
It's possible that the one you bought just happened to be old stock, possibly.
Yeah, it's just hard to know what the new stock is for sure.
So if you guys have a 1.x radio and you buy an XM Plus or an RXSR and you can't bind it, and then the best thing would be to then bind it to a 2.x radio. I mean, if you have a 2.x, I guess I should flip the question. If you have a 2.x radio and you can bind an RXSR or an XM Plus out of the box without updating it, that would be 100% confirmation that FrSky is shipping with the 2.x firmware on it, which Catherine says mine came with 2.1. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. So there's some people seem to think they're confirming it. The good news is, Blunty, that you have a Google Drive link with all the old firmwares in it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I have a Google Drive just in case FrSky decides to take them down. I think there were a couple R9 firmwares that I have on there that got taken down. But I'm just trying to catalog everything there. So if you have a really old FrSky firmware, I'll put the shout out. That's not in my drives. I'm going to link that in the YouTube here. Then let me know. I'd love to have it. If you send it to news at Joshua Bardwell, or I guess news at fpknowitall.com.
Yeah.
We can get that put on the FrSky firmwares page.
And I'll put a link to that Google Drive folder down in the video description below. After the video's over, you can come back and check that. And I could probably put it right here as well. I can just throw it up right here as well, or you could throw it in the chat, Blunty. Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, I knew they would eventually start shipping with the newer firmware on it. That just makes sense. Yeah. But then the
next thing I would expect is to see those firmwares leave the website.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
That's why I'm glad you're archiving them.
Yeah, to me, they have no reason to keep the fact that they made the firmware and the firmware is not compatible means they have no reason to keep the firmware around for users, because they're not concerned about users' compatibility issues, clearly. They'll just say, hey, the user can flash to the new firmware and then everything will work.
Yeah.
And that, again, like as we know, that puts the third-party receivers and third-party SPI situations kind of out of business.
That's I think their end game. Yeah. Is they don't want to see third-party receivers binding to their radios. And so once they're 100% onto, although to be fair, the multi-protocol project figured out how to bind to it, and so that's not true anymore either. So and presumably the Betaflight devs could do the same thing and implement a FrSky V2 in the SPI receivers.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, I feel like that's pretty much confirmed. Like, I've heard it from enough people that I feel like, even though I haven't personally verified it, I feel like that's pretty much confirmed.
I think you're likely going to see it come, most of the time. If you see one that's on 1.x, it's probably just older stock, and eventually that will sell out.
That's
and
my
we'll
guess.
see the 2.x stock come in.
All right, hang on. I'm bringing up this next page, but I have to allow ads. Okay, pause and refresh the page. This next one's a crazy story. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So next up, we've got a guy charged for hitting a helicopter in LA or in Hollywood. I think, man, this is going to be controversial for a lot of people.
So what's the story? Let's start with the story. There was
some
kind of a police thing.
Yeah, the story is basically this guy had his drone. He was in his house. He lived near this place. There was a police, basically the police had cordoned off for something that was going on, and they had police helicopters in the air. So he decided to put his drone up to see what was going on. And as he put his drone up to see what was going on, he put his head down to look at the screen, and as he was going up, ascending, he hit a helicopter. That's how he describes the situation. The helicopter pilot says he pulled up to evade, and the drone struck the bottom of the helicopter. There was damage on the helicopter's nose, antenna, and bottom cowlings. They claim that it could have taken the helicopter down if it had hit in the rotor.
Yeah, the thing about this that I think is the most interesting is that unlike so many of the other stories where pilots have claimed a drone was in the way, like there are some that can be more verified than others, but many of them are just completely unverifiable and kind of questionable. But in this case, they did an emergency landing, like, I don't know, in the middle of Hollywood. I don't know. They did an emergency landing, and then they went and they just walked over to the intersection where the drone fell on the ground, and they picked up the pieces of the drone, and right there on it was an SD card with this guy's picture, and so then they tracked him down, and it's like, oh, there's just no ambiguity here. I mean, innocent until proven guilty, but...
I mean, he describes, they have information from him, like a case report and such, and he describes basically what I described. So he admits to doing this.
Oh, so his lawyer is real pissed right now.
I assume so. I imagine he is playing cleanup right now for sure. But I believe, he basically says he heard police and wanted to fly the drone up. Yeah, so he described it being hard to see. He couldn't see the drone very well, So there's just a lot of things that are like, obviously you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, like there is a rule in the recreational rules that says give way to and do not interfere with manned aircraft. That is Rule 7 in the recreational FAA rules. No matter what, it's pretty much your responsibility to not hit that helicopter.
Yeah, a lot of people have really dug into this, and they're like, well, what if? And the bottom line is that unmanned aircraft must always, under all circumstances, give way to manned aircraft. What if I'm flying underneath the tree canopy and a helicopter comes? Doesn't matter. You are always supposed to have no. I know I have a spotter every time I fly.
Yeah.
And that's why if that happened to me, I would definitely see it coming. You're always supposed to have a spotter in the United States anyway, and you are supposed to be able to see and avoid manned aircraft under all circumstances.
I
Big
think
Data Pimp says that's not true. Looking forward to hearing more about that, Big Data Pimp. What is the circumstance under which a manned aircraft must give way to unmanned? I mean, I don't know. Maybe if we're talking about like a military drone. I don't know. Let's hear what he says. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing I think we should maybe discuss here is just how this affects like the laws and stuff, because I think a lot of people think that this is going to be like one of the death knells, that causes us to have remote ID and such. And I definitely, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I feel like that's a done deal. I feel like I've said this before, that the individual incidents of safety violations are the public justification for increased regulation. But the increased regulation is actually being driven by, to some degree, commercial interests, and to a large degree, Department of Homeland Security and other law enforcement interests. And so every time one of these numbskulls does something dumb, and the hobbyists go, see, this is why the regulation's happening, I'm like, you guys are missing the point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is you can't see the forest for the trees or whatever. I think it's getting lost in the weeds and trying to think that this is a big issue. I mean, it is an issue, and it's a stupid mistake, and it's definitely not something somebody should have done. But the world we live in, the idea that this isn't going to happen, I think is crazy. The fact that this is the first time this has happened, documented that I know of, that actually somebody is getting arrested for it, is like shows how safe this is and how unlikely this is to happen.
Exactly. Very good point. It's worth asking the question, if remote ID existed, would it have prevented this situation? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
The only thing remote ID would have done in this situation is when they hit the drone, they could pull records and find out which drone it was and who was flying it, which they managed to do anyway just by finding the wreckage and tracking down the SD card.
Yeah. I think that, the other thing, we mentioned a little bit last week, but when they did the DAC, the last DAC, there was comments by manned aviation that said, this does not help us. Remote ID isn't helping us find a drone. We need ADSB or some other solution to help us locate a drone. So the helicopter would not have known the drone was there, and the drone would not have known the helicopter was there any differently than now. And it's unfortunate that the law they are proposing is not going to make us any safer, and it's going to be a law to restrict our use of drones.
At the end of the day, that's the big argument for me, is if you make a law that makes us safer or benefits us in some way, and then you say, but there's going to be this trade-off, I'll go, okay, like, well, maybe is it worth it or isn't worth it? But remote ID has no practical benefit in terms of safety, and is anyway. C6 says, I work in the air medical industry. My company operates over 400 aircraft nationwide. We deal with drone near misses on a monthly basis. This has been going on for around 6 years now. Yeah. Would remote ID help with that, CSIC? I wonder. I mean, if you had a near miss, you could just say, okay, at such and such a time, at such and such a location, who was flying. And maybe some enforcement would matter. Because right now, the only reason we know who this guy was that he actually hit the helicopter.
Yeah.
But if you're an air ambulance and somebody's flying near the hospital and you don't hit them, maybe you would like to be able to pull their name from a database and go have the police knock on their door. I hate to say it, but I'm now making an argument in favor of remote ID. I should shut up. All right.
So let's move on to the community spotlight.
Okay.
This week we're going to talk about a community member, Speedy Turtle FPV, and he's created a program called the SpeedyCares package. So the SpeedyCares package is a box of random quad parts, and basically you get the quad parts to your house. This is an example of one of the boxes and some of the stuff that was in it, and you take out what you think you need, and you put in some stuff that you don't need anymore. And basically, once you're satisfied, then you send it off to the next person in the list. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's such a cool idea, because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I have a ton of like stuff sitting around, motors, video. I probably have more than most.
Yeah.
Stuff that doesn't really fit into any quad, or maybe it's a little older, and I'm constantly like, well, how can I get rid of this? Because someone would appreciate it.
Yeah.
So the only thing you have to do, if I understand the plan correctly, is you pay for shipping to yourself, or
Yep.
maybe you pay the outbound shipping. I can't remember which.
Yeah, you pay one of them.
Makes sense. You would pay the outbound shipping since you're shipping it. Yeah. And it's all on the honor system. If you just keep the whole box, then you're a terrible person. And,
And we know your address.
and we know your address. But yeah, look at all this stuff, man. There's good stuff in here.
Yeah.
Antennas, a frame. There's an Armatan frame in one of them.
Yeah, Speedy Turtle says you pay outbound shipping. So yeah,
Yeah,
then
that
you
makes
ship
sense.
to the next person.
I mean, I would do it for the bubble gum. Emacs motors.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I'm definitely going to get on the list of this for sure.
So let me look. Where is the speedyturtlefpv@gmail.com. So you email, and there's also a Patreon that he's got where he puts all the money into the package. Again, not personally vouching for this, just advertising that it exists. You can join the Patreon to help him, I guess, pay costs and buy stuff. So
Yeah, I'll put a link to the Discord in the YouTube here if anybody wants to join.
cool.
And then, yeah,
very nice.
and then you guys can check it out. There's a channel in there for that.
Yeah, thank you, Speedy, for
Yeah, this is a really cool project, man. I think stuff like this is really neat. You see the community kind of working together, and I think on the list of pictures there's a link of the map that it's gone to already. So we're just collecting slowly, all the
Nice.
places that it's been, and eventually it'll be all over the place.
Speedy Turtle. Oh, Speedy Turtle's here in the chat. I'm going to guess Joshua Wall. I'm going to guess that it is USA only, if only because international shipping has gotten so expensive right now. It's gone up so much. It used to be that I could send like a quad box sized box to Europe for $25. And now it's like $60-$70. So I'm going to guess. However, it probably wouldn't be too hard to set one of those up in another country, because all you need is a community big enough to start building the box and just mailing it around. Speedy says he's working on a worldwide idea. Very nice. No sense sending stuff over the ocean when you could ship it around locally. So very, very cool idea. Very great contribution to the community, Speedy Turtle. You're a rock star, dude.
Yeah, awesome stuff, man.
All right, I think we got one more topic. Is that right?
Yep, one more topic.
This is my favorite. This is
Near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, literally. I added this to the list because in my live stream just yesterday, I made some guesswork about why Tracer doesn't include 2.4 gigahertz LoRa modulation. A short recap. Tracer is believed to use a modulation type called FLRC. Ghost uses LoRa, and LoRa, well, actually, there's a really cool chart I'm going to pull up. Hang on. Where's the chart? I placed it in the document. Yeah. Let me show you guys this chart. So this is a chart showing it. It looks like a dick and two balls. I understand that. That's not what it is. I posted this on the TBS Lounge, and people were like, "Are you trolling us, Bardwell?" No, this is actually the chart. This is a map of data rate versus sensitivity, and contrary to what you might think, lower sensitivity is better. Lower sensitivity means longer range. You can hear a quieter signal, and here's higher data rates. This is the FLRC modulation that Tracer is believed to use, but Trappy won't confirm it. But it's likely that that's what it's using. You can see it has high data rate, but not that great sensitivity. And here's LoRa, which you can see has anywhere from medium data rate to low data rate, and anywhere from not that great to amazing sensitivity. And the confusing thing that I speculated about was, why doesn't we believe that the chipset that Tracer has the capability to do LoRa? Why won't they turn it on? And I argued that there was a conflict of interest. They didn't want to threaten their own Crossfire sales.
Yeah, but so you said that, and then Trappy responded, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, he did. He said that's not it at all. And I'll give you the exact quote. Where's the exact quote? It's on that video. Hang on, let me pull it up. Because I mean, he's talking to me now. We're on fairly good terms. Thankfully, I'm happy when we're on good terms. It is here, and we'll go to comments. And where's the pinned comment, you dork? Oh, I have responded. Can I see it? Oh, there it is. There it was. There it is. So Trappy said that he did not leave LoRa out because of any kind of like business consideration. He just thinks FLRC is going to be better. It's just going to win. And he's sticking with it. And he thinks that LoRa is going to go away. It's an interesting claim.
Yeah, so basically his theory is that people don't need the range in LoRa. The only reason we've used LoRa is because it's easy and because it seems like it's a chipset that people are aware of and that seems fairly easy to implement and such. But that for our uses, FLRC is plenty. And that is the system that we should use moving forward, and most people will move away from LoRa because you get a faster update rate and little loss of range comparatively, because you're still going to outfly video, this thing we've talked about quite a bit.
Well, that's the argument. If you can outfly video, I think everybody would agree that's more than enough control link range. However, some people who are using Tracer, like Pavel Spikowski tested Tracer versus Ghost, and found Tracer to have much shorter range, which is what you would expect if it was using FLRC modulation. Micro Stone says maybe it's not FLRC. Well, smart people have looked at the board, the Tracer board, and they take off the labels and stuff from the chips, but they strongly believe that it's the same. It's the Semtech chip, and if so, then it does FSK, FLRC, and LoRa, and that's just what it does. Nevertheless, they won't confirm it, and it's possible they're not. I tried to get to thinking after this conversation, what could they do to Tracer to increase its range from where it is now to the point where it no longer matters and it has so much longer range than without just going to LoRa. Lazy Gamer 423, the Semtech chip that is speculated that we know Ghost uses, and it's believed that Tracer uses, it does FSK, FLRC, and LoRa, all three. The 900 megahertz version doesn't do FLRC.
Yeah, you can't mix, but you could do either or. Like you can start in a LoRa mode or an FSK mode or an FLRC mode. Right?
Yeah.
I guess though, but Crossfire can fall over, right? From FSK to LoRa. So I guess it is possible.
It can fail over. Yep.
So
I thought of two things. One is they could increase the output power. Right now, Tracer's at 100 milliwatts.
Yes.
And if they were to crank that up to 1 watt, which they've insinuated they can do, that would give you at least double the range, and more like 3 to 3.5 times the range. I haven't done the exact math.
Yeah, Trappy said in the Painless 360 video that US would get 500 milliwatt and then 1 watt with the ham. So I would expect to see that unlock come at some point. And then, they'll be competing on a different level because, as you said, Ghost is 350 milliwatt versus Tracer at 1 watt is a little less than double, I guess, right? Something like that.
Well, yeah. 4 times the power is 2 times the range.
Yeah. 1400 would be double.
Yeah. So I don't know. It was an interesting response. I mean, I didn't expect Trappy to come back and say, nope, you got us. We're just trying to, you figured it out. And he's very cagey about what he will say because he's concerned that if he reveals too much, he'll be giving his competitors an advantage.
Sure. I think the idea that he says LoRa is maybe moving everybody's going to move away from LoRa is super interesting. Consider they built their ecosystem on Crossfire. I think if anybody is going to be concerned with LoRa and keeping it going, it should be TBS, because they have so much LoRa like out in everybody's equipment. So maybe I guess there's a bunch of different ways to think about this, right? You could think about it as, hey, they're just telling you what they think is going to work, and as we talked about, the pros and cons of range and update rate and stuff. The other way to look at it is, hey, they've already sold you Crossfire, so now they want to sell you Tracer, even though they're going to say they don't want to sell you Tracer. They're going to tell you FLRC is actually better, and you don't need LoRa, and everybody's going to move to FLRC.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I don't think they're married to any particular technology. And I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say I don't think that they would do sleazy things just to like milk money out of their customers. I feel like they're sincerely just love the technology and love RC and flight and like making cool products. But I kind of don't understand why they don't give the option. Because there definitely are use cases for LoRa in 2.4 gig. Like, unless Trappy, he keeps like going, what's the noise floor in the 2.4 gig band in your area? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have a spectrum analyzer. He's like, huh. And he won't come out and say it, but I think what he might be insinuating is that LoRa is sensitive down to like negative 130 dBm. But if the noise floor is at like negative 105, that kind of doesn't matter, because the noise floor is going to sort of level the playing field. And I wonder, but there got to be use cases. Somebody out there wants to do LoRa in 2.4 gig and go 20 kilometers, and I just don't see why you wouldn't let them, since your hardware can do it.
The other thing I'll say is it's very possible that eventually we'll see that ability, even though he says we won't, just because TBS is pretty good about like patching things in a firmware update and making things available. I don't think it's totally out of the question for suddenly there to be an update where he goes, okay, everybody asked for it, so we'll give it to you.
Well, he says as much. He says, if we at some point determine that LoRa offers benefits, it may get added. But things like this don't happen overnight. My bet is on LoRa disappearing. I have been wrong before. MMCX is a good example. By the way, I asked him if I could use this quote, and he said yes, but you have to put the MMCX part in. So I'm not just trying to be mean to him there. He said that, and he insisted I include it in the quote. It almost feels to me like they're, like when Apple took the headphone jack off and everybody was like, what are you doing, Apple? And Apple was like, shut up. We know what's good for you. Yeah. And I made this analogy to him, and he said, I don't like that analogy. I hate Apple. So I want to acknowledge that. But it feels like the argument he's making is, you guys think LoRa is good, but you don't know. FLRC is better. By the way, he explicitly has not confirmed that he's using FLRC. I'm making that assumption. He's like, this is better. You shut up. You think LoRa is good, but you're going to find out. And I mean, maybe he's right. That's the big thing. That's the big if. And
realistically speaking, as whatever you think about TBS, I think TBS has a lot of knowledge about radio links and testing, and they have so much history. Also, this thing is built on Crossfire, so there's a lot less worry that they've been doing in this development process about integration with the radio and links and protocols and such. It's just with the module to receiver side of things, and so I think when you think about the amount of Ghost development time and the amount of work that Ghost has to do to just integrate to start with, something that Crossfire has basically already done. I think that's something else to consider, is that a lot of Tracer's time, development time, is probably being spent on improving the technology versus integrating.
100% agree. I'll say this: TBS feels like they have an attitude of we know best. Yeah. And the MMCX is a great example. They had UFL connectors on their video transmitters forever. The FPV industry started using MMCX connectors. They have some advantages. And I was one of the people saying, can we please have a Unify with an MMCX connector? And for the longest time, TBS was like, no, MMCX is inferior. And people were like, can we please have it? And finally, they started making them. The flip side is, and sometimes they're right, by the way. Sometimes TBS is like, shut up, we know what's good for you. This is the best. And they're right. So, whereas Immersion RC very much feels like they have an attitude of, what do you want? We'll just do it. and a little bit more focused on responding directly to customer demands instead of being like, we're rock stars, we're the best, we know what you want.
Yeah, another good example of that is the what is it? The Addo, the Femto, whatever it's called, the little tiny receiver.
The Zepto. The Ghost Zepto.
The Ghost Zepto is a tiny little receiver that's much smaller than the Nano. And Trappy has said before on stream that they can make one that's that size with no issue, but they've chosen not to because they don't think you need it.
Exactly.
And it's the same exact idea. You know, that's the TBS design idea. You know, we know what's best for you. So I definitely agree. I see that a lot in their things. But also, it seems like they will eventually come to the other side if there's enough outcry.
Eventually. Yeah. All right. Well, we've fulfilled our weekly quota of talking about TBS and Tracer. So now the live stream can end. Thank you so much, Blunty. Thanks for coming out and doing this with me. Thank you guys for coming out in the chat and in the Discord. And come on back. Come on back next Tuesday at 6 for the next one.
For sure.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah. Let's go do it. We are out of here. Later, everybody.